When we're asked to find the gradients of horizontal and vertical lines, we can do it in a similar way. So the first example here, we've got a vertical line, and if we just pick 2 points on it, doesn't really matter what 2 points, so if I pick that, and remember the gradient is V over H, so that's the vertical change divided by the horizontal change. So the vertical change is the up and down change, so there's 3 boxes that it's changed. So it's gone from 2 across to 5, 2 up to 5 up, and the horizontal change is, well, it's going to be 3 across, and it's still 3 across. So this one here, let's look, the coordinate of that is 3 across, 2 up, and this one is 3 across, 5 up. So the change, the vertical change goes from 2 to 5, so that's 3, but the horizontal change going across the way, it's going from 3 and it's still at 3, so there's no change, so it's 0. Okay, and so we know that we can't divide by 0. If you put in 3 divided by 0 into your calculator, you'll get an error. So what we say is that the gradient of any vertical line is undefined. Okay, we just say it's undefined. And then for a horizontal line, going across the way, if we just take some coordinates there, so our first coordinate is 1 across, 5 up, and then 4 across, 5 up. So M is V over H. So the vertical change this time, so the vertical change is the up and down change. So it was 5 up and it's still 5 up. So there's no change vertically. But the horizontal change, it's going from 1 across to 4 across. So that's 3 boxes. And 0 divided by 3 is just 0. If you've got 0 sweets and 3 friends, nobody gets any sweets. So 0, you can divide 0 by a number. It makes sense, but you cannot divide by 0. Okay. So a quick way of kind of remembering that, I think, is to say that the horizontal gradient, if it's completely horizontal, completely flat, it's a 0 gradient. It's not a hill at all. It's just flat, it's 0. Whereas a vertical line has an undefined gradient. And if you imagine trying to walk up that line, you would just fall off, okay? So I think of it as undefined because it's impossible to walk up. Whereas a 0 gradient is nice and flat and fine. So now we go on to just make sure we can remember all our gradients. So we're going to sketch lines to show positive, negative, 0 and undefined gradients, okay? So first of all, for a positive gradient, so that's our first one. For a positive gradient, it goes upwards from left to right. So something like that. A negative gradient goes downwards from left to right. A 0 gradient, remember that's nice and flat and easy to walk on, is completely horizontal. So there's an example. And an undefined gradient would be really difficult to walk on. And so that would be completely vertical. Okay, so we have our positive gradient, negative gradient, 0 gradient, and undefined gradient. Now moving on to the equations of these horizontal and vertical lines. Let's look at some of the coordinates on this first line here. So if we just look at the coordinates, maybe starting here, and then just I'm going to write all these coordinates down. Okay. So the first one is 3 across, 0 up, then 3 across, 1 up, 3 across, 2 up, 3 across, 4 up, and 3 across, 3 up, 3 across, 4 up, and you can see a pattern. Remember, the x coordinate is the first coordinate and the y coordinate is the second. It's alphabetical. Okay, so the x is first. The x is your across coordinate, the y is your up and down coordinate. So all of these have an x coordinate of 3. So the equation of this line is x equals 3. It's 3 across in the x direction, okay? And the other thing is it's parallel to the y-axis. So x equals 3 is parallel to the y-axis. So now let's look at the other one, and perhaps you can already guess what it is. It's 5 up in the y direction, and it's parallel to the x-axis, so perhaps you can guess. But let's look at the coordinates of the line. So if we just look at these coordinates here, so And we'll start off with this one here. So 0 across 5 up, 1 across 5 up, 2 across 5 up, 3 across 5 up. You get the idea. And so in this example here, all our y coordinates are 5. So this is y equals 5. It's 5 up in the y direction, okay? So our arrow tells us that that's the y direction, is up to the sky. So that's, remember that y-axis, y to the sky, or if you think about it, sometimes I do a y like that, so that's up and down, whereas x goes across. X looks a bit like a cross, so it goes across. So in the y direction, it's 5, so it's y equals 5. It's also parallel to the x-axis. It's always parallel to the one that you don't use. So sketch following lines on these grids. So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to do it without a ruler, just because it takes so much longer on this particular app to use a ruler. So I'll try and draw it as straight as possible, but you should always use a ruler, obviously, when you're in class. So x equals 3. So that means it's 3 across in the x direction. So the x direction goes that way. So it's 3 across in that way. And it's going to be parallel to the y-axis. So that's it there. Y equals 4 means it's 4 up in the y direction. So there, and just make sure that's parallel to the line, the x-axis. X equals 1, 1 across in the x direction. And again, parallel to the y-axis. And now, I know this is a video, so it's not ideal, but try and imagine what these lines are going to look like. So the line x equals 6 is going to be 6 across in the x direction and parallel to the y-axis. Y equals 0 will be 0 up in the y direction, and not only parallel to the x-axis, but it is in fact the x-axis. So y equals 0 is the x-axis, and x equals 0 is the y-axis. Y equals 2 means it's 2 up in the y direction. The y direction is up the way, so 2 up, and it's parallel to the x-axis. And the reverse of that, writing down the equation of these lines. So try and do this on your own if you've got something to write it down on, or just hold the answers in your head. So this one here is 5 up in the y direction, and it's parallel to the x-axis. So that means it's y equals 5. It's always parallel to the opposite one. The second one is 0 across in the x direction. So it's x equals 0, and it's parallel to the y-axis. In fact, it is the y-axis. And the last one is 2 across in the x direction. So it's x equals 2, and it's parallel to the y-axis. So that's definitely correct.